Welcome to Testaments of Faith, Deborah, the warrior prophetess, courage that overthrew armies. Chapter 1. The cry of an enslaved people. The wind sliced through the valleys of Israel, carrying with it the echoes of a people's oppressed cries. For 20 years, Jabin, king of Canaan, with his army led by the cruel Sisera, crushed Israel under the weight of his power. 900 iron chariots, unbreakable as moving walls, roamed the land, spreading terror and submission. Villages stood deserted, and the Israelites, fearful, hid in caves, whispering muffled prayers. "How long, Lord? How long will we be slaves to our enemies?" The heavens seemed silent, but the God of Israel never abandons his people. At the appointed time, he would raise an unlikely leader, a woman whose name would echo through the ages, Deborah. While the people groaned, Deborah, seated under the palm tree between Ramah and Bethel, judged the disputes of Israel. Her wisdom was as clear as her spirit was strong. A prophetess, guided by the voice of God, Deborah wielded no sword, but her faith cut deeper than any blade. The people came to her not only for justice but for hope. She heard their sorrows, saw their tears, and felt the weight of oppression on every soul. But in the silence of her prayers, she heard the Eternal's voice. "Arise, Deborah, for I will give Sisera into the hands of Israel." The news spread like wildfire. God had spoken, and the prophetess, with a resolute gaze, knew what must be done. With determined steps, Deborah sent messengers to summon Barak, son of Abinoam. When he arrived, doubt clouded his eyes, though his heart longed for freedom. "The Lord commands you, take 10,000 men to Mount Tabor, for I will deliver Sisera into your hands," declared Deborah. Barak hesitated. Sisera's reputation was terrifying. "If you go with me, I will go. But if you do not go, I will not go," he replied. With calm resolve, Deborah agreed, but warned, "I will go with you, but the honor of this victory will not be yours. The Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." Thus, destiny was sealed, and the war was about to begin. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Israel's Army. The fields of Kadesh trembled with the arrival of messengers bearing the command of Deborah and Barak. Tribe after tribe, men left their harvests, families, and fears behind, gathering like a river growing mighty as it meets the sea. Zebulun, Naphtali, Issachar, and Ephraim sent their warriors, each carrying the burden of years of oppression and a burning desire for freedom. The sun gleamed on rusted spears and swords that, though worn by time, shone with newfound purpose. Their courage did not come from the strength of their arms, but from faith in a God who had once parted seas and brought down walls. Atop Mount Tabor, Barak gazed at his army with a mix of pride and trepidation. 10,000 men stood ready to face the most feared enemy of their time. Yet, deep within, a question lingered. How could they defeat Sisera, whose army boasted 900 iron chariots? As the wind stirred his cloak, a steady presence approached. Deborah, the prophetess, her eyes filled with unwavering resolve, touched Barak's shoulder. "Did not the Lord say he would deliver the enemy into our hands? It is not by the sword, but by the arm of the Almighty that we will prevail." Her words sliced through his doubts like blades, and Barak knew the battle was won before it had even begun. Meanwhile, in Sisera's camp, the general surveyed his army with arrogant confidence. Iron chariots lined up like moving walls, horses neighing impatiently, and well-trained soldiers awaiting his command. "Israel dares to challenge us," he scoffed. But on the horizon, the glint of Israelite weapons was already visible. Sisera smiled, unaware that on this day, heaven and earth would conspire against him. Atop the mountain, Deborah lifted her eyes to the heavens, and with a voice as firm as thunder, declared, "Arise, Barak, for this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands." And like an avalanche, the men of Israel charged down Mount Tabor, ready to write a new chapter of courage and faith. Chapter 3. The Clash of Armies. the God who fights for his people. The sound of 10,000 Israelite warriors' footsteps echoed through the valley as Mount Tabor faded behind them. Their hearts beat as one, not from fear, but from the fervor of those who know that the battle belongs to the Lord. Spears trembled in their hands, not from weakness, but from anticipation. Before them stood Sisera's army, already in position, a living wall of Canaanite soldiers protected by 900 iron chariots, gleaming under the sun. Sisera, with a cruel smile, raised his sword, ready to crush any hope Israel dared to have. But above all, the heavens stirred. The God of Israel was about to act. Then Deborah's voice rang out from the mountaintop, proclaiming, "Barak, advance, for the Lord has already delivered the enemy into your hands." Like a river bursting through its banks, Israel's army surged forward with shouts that thundered through the valley. Sisera scoffed, but his smile quickly vanished. Dark clouds gathered, and a furious storm broke upon the valley. Torrential rains turned the dry ground into mud, and Sisera's dreaded iron chariots became stuck, as useless as stones. Horses reared, soldiers fell, and what once seemed an advantage turned into despair. Israel attacked with unwavering courage, while the enemy army, confused and powerless, began to flee. Amid the chaos, Sisera abandoned his trapped chariot and fled on foot, rain lashing against his face as he ran. His heart pounding not from glory, but from fear. Seeing their leader flee, the Canaanite soldiers lost all hope. Israel's army, led by Barak, pursued them to the last man. The victory was not merely military, it was divine. And as the battlefield fell into silence, one enemy still breathed, hiding, fleeing. But his end was near, and it would come at the hands of someone he would never suspect. Chapter 4. Sisera's flight, a fate sealed in a tent. Sisera ran breathless, feeling the weight of defeat in every step. His heart, once swollen with arrogance, now pounded with fear. His soldiers were dead, his chariots destroyed, and his fame crumbled like sand in the wind. He needed to hide, to survive. Then he spotted a solitary tent in the valley of Zanaim, belonging to a woman named Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite. Sisera knew the name, for Heber was at peace with Jabin, his king. With a sigh of relief, he approached, believing he had found refuge. Jael, a woman with a serene gaze, saw the general approaching. She knew who he was and what he represented. As he arrived, Sisera pleaded, "Give me shelter, woman. I am fleeing from my enemies." Calmly, Jael opened her tent, offering him a blanket for cover. "Do not fear," she whispered as he settled in. But still trembling, Sisera asked, "Give me a little water." Instead, Jael gave him milk, warm and soothing. Exhausted from his flight and lulled by weariness, Sisera fell asleep, believing he was safe. But as he slept, Jael knew that this man's fate was sealed and that her courage would be remembered forever. With silent steps, Jael took a tent peg and a hammer. The sound of the wind was her only companion. With steady hands and a resolute heart, she approached the sleeping enemy. With one swift and precise blow, the peg pierced Sisera's temple, pinning him to the ground. The general who had terrorized Israel for 20 years died not in battle, but at the hands of a simple yet courageous woman. When Barak arrived in search of the fugitive, Jael came out to meet him and calmly said, "Come, and I will show you the man you seek." There before his eyes lay Sisera, defeated, and Israel, at last, free. Chapter 5. The Song of Deborah, Victory Celebrated. Under the golden sky of dawn, Deborah stood among the tribes of Israel and raised her voice like an echo from the heavens. Praise the Lord for the valiant of Israel who willingly offered themselves to battle. Her song, more powerful than 1,000 swords, not only celebrated victory but recounted the courage of a people who, though afraid, trusted in the God who never fails. When princes lead and the people offer themselves willingly, blessed be the Lord. Her words echoed through the hills, and each note seemed to etch into Israel's heart the reminder that true strength comes from faith, not human might. The gathered people listened in reverent silence, tears streaming down faces marked by suffering, now transformed by hope. Deborah sang of the tribes that answered the call: Ephraim, Benjamin, Zebulun, and Naphtali, who did not hesitate. But she also remembered those who stayed behind, cowering in their comfort. Why did you stay among the sheepfolds to hear the bleating of the flocks? The warning was clear: omission in the face of God's call comes at a price. Yet, when she spoke of Jael, her voice rose in gratitude. Blessed above women is Jael, the wife of Heber. She crushed Sisera's head, piercing his temple. The people cheered, acknowledging that through a woman's hands, God brought salvation. Her song continued, exalting the God who made even the stars fight against Sisera. The torrential rain sent by the Lord turned the Kishon River into a raging torrent that swept away the enemy's iron chariots. Cursed be Meroz, Deborah cried, referring to the city that refused to help God's people. But at last, her voice softened. So perish all your enemies, O Lord. But may those who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength. And so, as the sun shone upon Israel, there was peace for 40 years, and Deborah's name was forever engraved as a symbol of faith, courage, and obedience to the living God. Chapter 6. The Burden of Oppression and the Cry for Freedom. As the years passed, Deborah's song became a distant echo, and the heart of Israel, once faithful, began to stray from the Lord. The hills of Canaan, once the stage of victories, now witnessed a people surrendering to pagan idols. Thus, as a consequence of their disobedience, God delivered Israel into the hands of the Midianites. The enemy swarmed like locusts, destroying crops, plundering livestock, and leaving only hunger and despair behind. The Israelites fled to caves, fearing the hordes of men who, mounted on camels, swept through the land like a plague. Their lament grew louder. Lord, why have you abandoned us? But God's silence was, in truth, an invitation to repentance. In the midst of oppression, God raised up a prophet who reminded Israel of his past deeds. It was I who brought you out of Egypt, who tore down walls and gave you this land. But you have forsaken me. Touched by pain and remembrance, the people cried out even louder. And as always, the Lord heard. In the valley of Ophrah, a young man named Gideon, from the tribe of Manasseh, was threshing wheat in a winepress, hiding from the enemies. His heart carried not only fear but also doubt. If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? But that day, Israel's story was about to change once more. As Gideon worked, an angel of the Lord appeared under the oak in Ophrah. With a gaze that pierced both soul and time, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Surprised, Gideon replied, "If the Lord is with us, where are all his miracles?" The angel did not answer his doubts, only declared, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" Still uncertain, Gideon remembered his weakness. "I am the least in my family, and my clan is the weakest in Israel. But God does not choose the strongest. He strengthens the chosen." With a firm promise, the angel assured, "I will be with you, and you will strike down the Midianites as if they were but one man." The mission was given, and Gideon's courage was about to be forged in the fire of faith. Chapter 7. The Altar of Faith and the Challenge of Obedience. Night enveloped the valley of Ophrah as Gideon, still fearful, lifted his eyes to the star-filled sky. God's calling echoed in his mind, but the weight of doubt still pressed on his chest. "If I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign," he pleaded. Then, placing a fleece of wool on the ground, he prayed, "If in the morning the fleece is wet with dew and the ground is dry, I will know that it is you who calls me." Dawn brought the answer. The fleece was soaked, and the ground was dry. But Gideon, human like us, still hesitated. "Forgive me, Lord, but give me one more sign. This time, let the fleece be dry and the ground covered with dew." And God, patient, granted his request. Now, Gideon knew that the impossible was only the beginning. But before the battle, God had a request. "Tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it." Gideon's heart raced. Doing so would challenge not only his family but the entire people. Yet, that night, he and 10 servants destroyed the pagan altar and, in its place, built an altar to the Lord. When the people saw the ruined altar, fury erupted. "Who did this? Bring Gideon so he may die." But Joash, his father, wisely replied, "If Baal is a god, let him defend his altar himself." Thus, Gideon was not only spared but renamed Jerubbaal, the one who contends with Baal. With the calling confirmed and the altar raised, Gideon blew the trumpet, and the men of Israel gathered. But upon seeing the army, God did something unexpected. "There are too many. If they win, they will say it was by their own strength. Reduce the number." Fear gripped Gideon, but he obeyed. First, all who were afraid were dismissed. 22,000 men departed, leaving 10,000. Still, God said, "There are still too many." Leading them to the river, God tested them. Only those who drank water with their hands were chosen. 300 remained. The army that would face thousands was now a handful of men, but God whispered, "With these 300, I will save Israel." Chapter 8. The victory of the 300, the God of impossible strategies. Night fell over the valley like a cloak of shadows, and the Midianite camp stretched out like an ocean of tents and soldiers. Gideon, though chosen, still felt the weight of his mission. But God, knowing his heart, whispered, "If you are afraid, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they say." Silently, Gideon slipped among the enemy tents, where he overheard 2 soldiers talking. "I had a dream," one said. A loaf of barley bread rolled into the camp and struck a tent, causing it to collapse. The other replied, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon. God has delivered the Midianites into his hands." Gideon's heart swelled with courage. He was not just a man, he was God's instrument. Returning to his reduced army, Gideon divided the 300 into 3 groups. He gave them no swords, only trumpets, jars, and hidden torches. "Under the starry sky," he whispered, "do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, blow yours too, shout, and break the jars." At the signal, the sound of trumpets pierced the night, jars shattered, and torches flared like 1,000 moving stars. The cry echoed through the valley, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Terror gripped the enemy camp. The Midianites, in panic, drew swords against each other, believing they were surrounded by thousands. Chaos turned into slaughter. The enemies fled, and Gideon pursued them relentlessly. The Midianite princes, Oreb and Zeb, were captured and killed. But Gideon did not stop. He crossed the Jordan, exhausted but determined, pursuing the kings Zebah and Zalmunna, who mocked him. "Are you truly capable?" Gideon, with fire in his eyes, replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, I will deliver your heads." And so he did. With 300 men, he defeated thousands. The victory was not by human strength, but by the God who turns the weak into warriors and obedience into miracles. Chapter 9. The Legacy of Faith, the song that never fades. The dust of battle slowly settled as Gideon, Israel's unlikely hero, returned victorious. The people, ecstatic, ran to meet him, proclaiming, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson." But Gideon, humble before the greatness of God, replied firmly, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son. The Lord will rule over Israel." His voice, filled with reverence, reminded the people that victory came from God, not from men. The 300 warriors, weary but proud, knew they had been part of something that transcended history, a battle won not by strength, but by unshakable faith. Yet, even with victory, Israel's heart remained vulnerable. Gideon asked the warriors for the gold earrings taken from the Midianites and made an ephod, a priestly garment. Initially, it was a symbol of gratitude, but soon it became an object of idolatry. The people, once delivered, turned to worship what was visible, forgetting the invisible God who had saved them. Gideon, who had fought against idols, witnessed the people fall again. But during his lifetime, Israel had peace for 40 years, for the fear of the Lord still echoed in their hearts. At his death, Gideon left a legacy of courage and faith, but also a silent warning. The true battle does not end on the field, but in the heart. When his name was remembered, it was not only as the warrior who defeated the Midianites, but as the man who dared to believe when all others doubted. The song of Deborah, the hammer of Jael, and the trumpet of Gideon became part of Israel's history, reminding them that God does not choose the qualified but qualifies the chosen. And even when the people forgot, the echo of their faith remained, a timeless reminder that when we trust in the Lord, even 300 men can defeat an uncountable army. The story of Deborah, Jael, and Gideon teaches us that true power lies not in weapons or the number of warriors, but in obedience and faith in God. Even when fear shouts, the voice of the Lord is louder. If God could use a woman like Deborah, a housewife like Jael, and an insecure young man like Gideon, what can't he do through you? Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more content. Stay with God, and until next time on Testaments of Faith. Thank you.